Having gone far too in-depth into all 10 feature-length Saw movies, and the short film that spawned them, I guess now's as good a time as any to rank them. From worst to best, of course. Now, just to preface this is my favorite movie franchise, and none of these are outright terrible movies, nor are they cinematic masterpieces. I'll give a quick synopsis and express why they rank where they do, but it won't be nearly as long-winded as the individual video essays. So, if you're interested in that, I have a playlist full of my complete thoughts of each. Okay, let's go. Ninth installments in horror franchises are generally pretty bad, either being a reboot recasting the iconic villain, like Nightmare on Elm Street or Hellraiser, or just being a bad movie, but not even a fun bad movie, like Jason Goes to Hell. Spiral ends up somewhere in between. It's not bad by any means, but it's incredibly dissonant from the rest of the franchise, trading in the traditional, mostly serious tone for one laced with Chris Rock's stand-up comedy, Samuel L. Jackson catchphrases, and some bland side characters. Touted as a step in a new direction for the series, Spiral seems like it takes various points from previous films, and throws a coat of paint over it to present them as new. Paired with that is a convoluted message, offering up a poignant commentary of holding bad cops accountable for their actions, while not excusing good cops to allow injustice to maintain. Especially since it was released in 2021, it was a very timely subject to try and integrate into the film. While there are some bright moments, it ended up falling more so into the not all cops territory, constantly telling us that Zeke Banks is one of the good ones, while showing us the inverse. I could look past that issue if there were more to the movie, but there isn't much else. It's a relatively dry story, a cast of characters that don't win over the audience before they're killed, and none of the traps are overly moving. The only bright spot for me was Max Minghella as William Shank, Zeke's new partner turned Jigsaw copycat killer. As I do enjoy the arc that Chris Rock and writers Peter Goldfinger and Josh Stolberg went for. After his father was unnecessarily killed by Zeke's partner, Shank spent his whole life trying to cull the bad actors of the police force. Once he reveals himself to Zeke, he offers to work together, Zeke finding the bad cops, and Shank will take the rest from there. And as weird as it sounds, I think that would have been a great place to take the movie, and subsequent movies afterwards, if they were to get them. Instead, Zeke saves his dad, the man that covered up the entire force's wrongdoings, cementing the theme that even the best of cops are contributing to a corrupt and unjust system. It's a beautifully shot movie. Visually there are some good looking images, and some interesting camera tricks, but unfortunately too few and far between to keep me engaged in the game at hand. Because at the heart of it, this is just a feature-length version of the cop drama that is largely take it or leave it in the series. In some installments, it is the best part, or at least on par with the game. But here it's the narrative catalyst, which doesn't get anywhere with Chris Rock squinting and spouting phrases from the cop cliché handbook. Not even the traps are doing it for me in this one. None of them are overly imaginative, nor beautifully simplistic. The best one is definitely Marcus's, stringing up the chief of police, the main pig, mirroring that of the pig marionette, that this iteration of Jigsaw uses for each of the tapes. It's campy and kinda brilliant, but not at all subtle. I suppose this is as good as time as any to talk about the voice.
Hello, Detective Boswick.
I hate it. It's so bad. It's like the blood-curdling TikTok text-to-speech voice with ChatGPT Jigsaw messaging. Obviously nothing hits quite like John Kramer's iconic tone, but Shank really needs to hit the studio and re-record. Spiral isn't a dreadful movie to sit through. I'll still watch it with my regular Saw rewatchings, and I've learned to enjoy aspects of it for what it is. As much as it tried to not be a Saw movie, it still is a Saw movie. That same grungy charm is still there, hidden underneath layers of bad characters and narratives, leaving it to be my least favorite in the franchise.
You sure? Yeah.
You're not Jigsaw, bitch!
Even while I was writing the script, I kept wavering between Spiral and Jigsaw for the bottom spot on the list. And I think I'm happy with Jigsaw being slightly better than Spiral, just for the ending alone. I absolutely love the twist ending. It's redolent of the original's reveal, an astonishingly jaw-dropping final game sequence that almost makes me forget that I sat through 80 minutes of nothing beforehand. Jigsaw was the first Saw film since 2010, taking that 7-year hiatus to try and reinvigorate some life into a franchise running on empty. Instead, it plays it far too safe, not taking any risks in the narrative or the games, aside from adding yet another acolyte to Jigsaw's Rolodex. Logan Nelson is probably the most bland main character in the franchise. I would have been way more impressed if he and Eleanor were revealed to be working together the whole time, parallel to that of John and Amanda. Eleanor as a character had all the potential in the world to do so, an obsession with all things Jigsaw, even to the point where she built one of John's original traps from blueprints. Instead, she serves as a mere red herring, joining a sea of red herrings that plague this movie. Along with Eleanor, we have Detective Halloran, who they set up as this moralist, misogynistic cop who acts so suspiciously for, as we find out in the end, no reason at all. Also, he probably has a bottom 3 death scene in the franchise, turning into a CGI Demogorgon via a mortician laser. With the cop plot comes the game plot, and this one takes an interesting turn that I'm kind of torn on, but I think I end up liking it. The game we watch involves 5 players, who, much like Saw 5, get picked off one by one, leading to a 1v1 in which both could technically escape if they had listened to the rules. Unfortunately, John's neighbor Anna tried to kill Ryan with the shotgun John provided them. Oh yeah, maybe I forgot to mention John's alive in this one. That's because the game we spend the entire movie watching actually happened 10 years prior, and all of the bodies the cops have been finding are a part of a game Logan creates, involving criminals who weren't convicted for their crimes. And it completely takes the tension out of the game. But I also never cared about if they lived or died either, so eh. Instead, I kind of love the disarranged timeline, which is so reminiscent of the franchise as a whole. It's the inverse of finding out Saw 3 and 4 take place simultaneously, and while I still like that one more, it's at least a compelling aspect in an otherwise formulaic Saw movie, saving it from the bottom of the list.
I knew you were crazy the minute I laid eyes on you. Crazy.
Hey, Saw 7? Count your blessings, because Hoffman's the only thing that saved you from last place here. Objectively, Saw 3D, the final chapter, is the worst in the franchise, but also somehow towards the top in enjoyment levels while watching. It reached that precipice of so bad that it's fun movie, and dove headfirst through the camera in 3D. Yeah, it's a 3D movie. I hate it. It's a lame gimmick that I'm glad we're mostly over. The distributors didn't even care enough about this movie to color correct it properly for home release, so now we just have pink blood. As the 7th Saw film in as many years, Saw 3D was doomed from the start. Combining 2 movies into one jumbled script, bringing back Kevin Greuter with a threat of legal action, when he was about to direct Paranormal Activity 2, and, you know, being in 3D, all while trying to tie up a litany of loose ends that the series had left behind over the years. And you know what? I think it did fine enough. With the Hoffman arc, I learned early on that we were in for a ride so bumpy and bizarre compared to the first 3, that it wasn't even worth comparing them. But following Saw 6, I had pretty high hopes for another good entry in the series. And boy, I sure got a movie. The main draw in this one is Mark Hoffman, and his continued descent into serial killer mania. We do have a game with Bobby Dagan, a man who falsely claimed to be a Jigsaw victim for his 15 minutes of fame. A brave twist on the tale of James Frey and A Million Little Pieces. But I just don't care enough about him or the innocent people caught in his game. Whenever he's on screen, it's like a commercial break for the feature presentation of Hoffman's murderous rampage. Love him or hate him, Hoffman is a good villain. Terrible Jigsaw, fundamentally misunderstanding everything John tried to teach him, as flawed as his logic might be. But damn, this makes for a good movie, if you view it as a slasher. The FBI is hot on his trail, and feeling the heat, he takes out everyone he can, leaving a wake of gasoline and flames. And he almost got away with it too, if it weren't for that meddling Dr. Gordon to stop him. That's another one of my major gripes with the film, retconning Dr. Gordon being John's greatest asset from the very beginning, which diminishes Amanda and Hoffman's roles in their respective movies. They're such important characters to the overall narrative, simply made an afterthought. And the Dr. Gordon reveal isn't even a shock. We see him multiple times throughout the film, so it's not a question of if we see him again, but when. We've got some of, if not the most gruesome traps in this installment, highlighted by the neo-Nazi Rube Goldberg of death. This marks where I see the series becoming what so many people maligned it being from the start, pure gore with no narrative redemption. And that's fine for me, because unlike the 2 on the list before this, at least it's not boring. Overall, I have a pretty good time watching this one. The final act goes so bonkers, and Hoffman's arc is evocative of the franchise as a whole, completely disregarding the ethos of John Kramer in favor of an unhinged, blood-laden killing spree. This 7th Saw film essentially killed the franchise, leaving it in limbo for over a decade, only being saved by a film coming up.
Run into the tunnel.
Perhaps putting the equivalent of a student project with a budget of $2,000 on this list ahead of multi-million-dollar budget feature-length films is disrespectful. But also, this is a pretty good short film. This is the short film that started the beautifully grotesque franchise, drawing enough attention to get enough of a budget to fund the full feature-length project. In a quick 9-minute runtime, we watch Leigh Whannell play an alpha version of Amanda, identical reverse bear trap and all. We see a lot of groundwork laid for the original film, the grungy green aesthetic, the horrifying trap that leads to a morally questioning decision. And even Billy's here.
Hello, David.
Well, at least they ironed out some kinks for the real thing. But at what cost? We lost his little hat. Without Tobin Bell's menacing voice, we're left with a Billy better served for Skinamarink. It does take some of the gravity of the situation, but that's brought right back when David's forced to choose between life and death. Will he find the key in his cellmate's stomach, or face the unforgiving repercussion of the reverse bear trap? Once we cut back to the interrogation, that question is answered. Saw 0.5 is a really good short film, and a perfect appetizer to the Saw franchise. The ideas are there. Execution on an actual shoestring budget is fantastic. The industrial metal music is there. It feels like a college project. It's just so charming. Hell, I would have thrown whatever I had in my piggy bank at the time just to see this on the big screen. Is it perfect? No, not by any means. But it does try to impress, which puts it at number 8 on the list.
Oh! He's pulling his cock out!
Saw 4 had one of the toughest tasks in the whole franchise, as following Saw 3, it had to craft a new storyline without the legendary John Kramer. And for what it's worth, it does just that, setting up a new villain in Mark Hoffman with a twist similar to that of the first film, as throughout you're left guessing who it could be. And it ends up being the one you least expect. Kind of. Darren Lynn Bousman returns for what would be his final effort in the original 7, and we follow Lieutenant Rigg, as he makes quick work of the traps Jigsaw has set out for him. Little does he know, making good time is his inevitable downfall, as reaching the door too quickly actually fails the game. It's a heartbreaking realization. Timers produce this innate anxiety and urgency to complete tasks, and Saw 4 flips that on its head in such a harrowing way. Alongside Rigg's game plot, we're also introduced to Special Agents Strahm and Perez, who are tasked with following breadcrumbs left by Jigsaw. But with the various messages and bodies piling up, they deduce that they are the ones being targeted. As Perez falls victim to a booby-trapped Billy, Strahm is left to his own devices, which includes interrogating Jill Tuck through questionable methods. Speaking of Jill Tuck, it's her grand entrance into the series as the neoteric widow of John Kramer. Through her, as well as a flurry of flashbacks, we get to see a more emotional side of John, and the catalyst for him going down the path that he chose. Jill works at a health clinic, and one night is held up by Cecil, who's looking to score some free meds. In the process, he slams the door on Jill, who's like 7 months pregnant here, which leads to her miscarriage. John had everything meticulously planned, as he does with everything, and this hitch in his plan sends him into a deep depression, taking his frustrations out on himself, Jill, and his friends around him. Chief of which is Art Blank, a lawyer and John's business partner, and now maestro of Rigg's game, and player of his own. When Rigg busts in, it leads to not only his death, but also Art's and Eric Matthews's as well. Where the police procedural is usually the dull area of Saw movies, in this one it shines. I don't care much for Rigg's game, simply because the message it tries to teach is that being selfless and saving people is bad. But that's his job? He's literally a SWAT team leader. But Perez and especially Strahm are so captivating in their roles. And at the end, when Strahm approaches the end of the trial left by Jigsaw, we find out that this whole movie has been transpiring at the same time as Saw 3. And it's such an amazing timeline twist, which elevates both movies as a result. As this film ties up a bunch of loose ends from the first 3 films, it also leaves us with a lot more, which take a few movies to get answered. Overall, it lacks the thematic depth that the original 3 have, and isn't an overly entertaining watch through the game, leaving it just in the bottom half of the Saw franchise.
Hello, Agent Strahm.
Fuck you.
Saw 5's a very interesting one for me, as it seems to fluctuate the most in my rankings upon rewatches. Sometimes it breaks into the top half, sometimes it's closer to the bottom, but I think overall, right in the middle seems about right. After all, it's the perfect Saw movie. It's got everything the Saw series had become known for, and dialed it right up to 11. First, the game is a return to the group facet of Saw 2, which tries to remedy the main predicament of not giving each character enough time to shine, and show their true character, but overall doesn't manage to accomplish this here either. Instead, it's a bland batch of 5 people, who learn they must work together to escape. And there's the thing, they could have all escaped, if they had worked together through each trap. At their exordium, Jigsaw tells them that they must do the opposite of what they know, which was to put themselves before anyone else. In the end, they learn their lesson a bit too late, leaving just 2 people for the final trap, Britt and Malik, who donate 10 pints of blood between them. But the real fruitful part of this endeavor is once again our cop plot, and this one's an all-timer, as it's one colossal cat-and-mouse game between Special Agent Peter Strahm and Detective Mark Hoffman. Much of the build-up is Strahm stealing Jigsaw case files and returning back to the scenes, piecing together the events that transpired. and we, as the viewer, see his headcanons in action as flashback sequences. The victim that gets Hoffman the surveilling eye of Strahm is Seth Baxter, the man who murdered Hoffman's sister. As he draws closer to Hoffman, more of their characters are shown. Hoffman through flashbacks with John Kramer, as John takes him under his wing as his apprentice, while also getting a bit of immunity having someone on the force so close to him. And Strahm, with his fervent exigency for the truth, which leads to his ultimate encounter with Hoffman. In the end, Hoffman tried to warn Strahm, but Strahm, having consistently disregarded Hoffman's clues, ends up getting crushed by enclosing walls. And I'm right at the edge of my seat throughout the chase, which ultimately ends in a satisfying way. I didn't really have a favorite between Strahm or Hoffman. If anything, probably Strahm up to this point, given his obsession with finding an answer. But Hoffman outsmarting him is a very good conclusion nonetheless. This is a solid thematic follow-up to Saw 3, where John's legacy is in the balance following his and Amanda's deaths. And seeing Hoffman completely tarnish it through vengeance is a perfect way to shift the series. In the Hoffman arc, the traps are unfair, many of the victims getting pretty unwinnable games. It's not the same Jigsaw traps that we've come to love. And that's the thing, it's not the same Jigsaw. This is all Hoffman. His ego gets in the way of his intellect, leading to a plethora of close calls. But as John told him, if you're good at anticipating the human mind, it leaves nothing to chance. He adapted to Strahm's brash nature, led him down the funneled path, right to his final test, and still, he failed. Even with John dead, his teachings are ingrained in Hoffman, even if much of them have mutated.
Everybody deserves a chance.
As much as this is the perfect Saw movie, that title comes with its drawbacks as well. Darren Lynn Bousman stepped down from the director's chair, as David Hackle took the reins of the series. First off, I hate how this looks. Gone are the charmingly grungy filters of blues, yellows, and greens, leaving us with this completely washed out, bland palette. The pacing often gets stunted with the inclusion of flashbacks, inserting Hoffman into scenes of series past, instead of providing some new plot points. Which leaves somewhat of a bad taste in my mouth, as it largely retcons a lot of what we've already seen John and Amanda do in the first movies. It's a good Saw movie, but these issues weigh it down, and it's just not enough of a standout to wind up in the upper echelons of the franchise.
Hello, Troy.
Now we're getting to the good stuff. I love Saw 3 so much. The tonal shift from the first two to this one always hits so damn hard. Turning the focus from the graphic James Jigsaw orchestrates to Jigsaw. No, John, himself, allows us to slow the pace down and really dive into his psyche, and why he does what he does. And even further, Amanda, his prized associate, and her descent into jealous madness, which we later learn the inciting event for. It's such an excruciatingly sorrowful film, something not expected to find in a Saw movie. Here, John Kramer succumbs to his failures, at the hands of Jeff Denlin. John's teachings have gone up in flames around him. As his only one true claim to success, Amanda fails her game, and watches her final, panicked breaths following her being shot by Jeff. If Jeff can learn the lesson John has been trying to drill into him throughout a series of tests, forgiveness, then maybe his retribution methods have merit to them. Unfortunately for him, Jeff takes the chance for revenge and makes the most of it, sealing his, John's, and Lynn's fates. Lynn, who we learn to be his wife, was kidnapped and forced to be John's primary care doctor, keeping him alive for fear of her shotgun collar detonating. She performs the most unsanctioned brain operation on John to relieve some of his pressure, in one of the more tense and gruesome scenes in the series, especially impressive because it's not even a trap. Amanda's failure to apply John's true methods results in Lynn being shot, and when Jeff kills John, she's finished off in the makeshift operating room. It's a gut-wrenching end for her, for everyone involved really. So many people's lives depended on John's game playing out, but it all fell apart with Jeff's defiance. Speaking of Jeff, I hate that he got pulled into this. He's a grieving father, bitter at the world around him that has taken his son from him, and the killer got off easy. It seems hypocritical that John is singling him out for this, considering the loss of his son, who wasn't even born yet, and his less than normal response to it. But aside from that, Jeff might be the worst player that John has ever found. He failed almost every test, and the only person he saved was killed by his carelessness in the shotgun trap. And it's not even like these were some unfair traps. All Jeff had to do was show a little bit of urgency and willingness to forgive those who had wronged him, and they all would have lived. But these traps might just take the crown jewel of them all. The freezer trap is a drawn-out, wince-inducing one. The judge's drowning in rotting pig juice is probably the most disgusting in the series, and Timothy Young's death in the rack is the most classically brutal. But the absolute standout is Amanda, as we see her and John's relationship build and eventually break, picking up the pieces of her addiction, and through 2 separate tests we've seen before, molding her into his apprentice. Again, for the reason we find out in a later film, she breaks, fulminating John's modus operandi.
Fix me, motherfucker! I'm standing right here!
And ultimately meeting her end. Watching Amanda grow in importance throughout the films, watching Shawnee Smith own the role and dominate every scene she's in, is nothing short of an absolute treat. The highs greatly outweigh the lows in Saw 3, making it one of my favorites in the series. And like I alluded to with Saw 4, the simultaneous storylines connecting at the end really enhance the experience. But my issues with Jeff's game keep this at 5th in my ranking for now.
I call that epic bad luck.
After so many years, we finally got a good Saw movie. And it's one that completely ditched the formula of old. There's no cop drama in this, leaving us with 2 hours of the most grounded games yet. We get another prequel, and Tobin Bell gets to come back and own the role of John Kramer once more. And own it he does. This is one of my favorite performances from 2023. The pain, jubilance, and wrath he shows is evocative of the range shown throughout the franchise by one of horror's most iconic villains. Saw X is set sometime between Saw and Saw 2, and follows John as he gets an experimental cancer treatment in Mexico. Finally being given his new lease on life, his exuberance is short-lived when it's revealed Dr. Cecilia Peterson and her team scammed him, as well as 34 other people, running off with millions. John could just simply walk away, head in hand, but he's got lessons to teach, collecting each of them, and putting them all through the most brutal tasks yet. They are simple traps, but made all too visceral with the cinematography. That is, until the tables are turned on him, as John is placed into one of his own traps, alongside Carlos, a friend he made along the way. Cecilia nearly gets the best of him, but greed blinds her and her partner Parker, leading to their final test, which leaves Cecilia stranded in the room and Parker dead. But of course, John couldn't do all this alone, as Amanda returns in epic style, fucked up Bob and all. She kidnaps all the people for the tests, and provides us with some of the most emotional scenes in the series, as we see even more of her bond with John, making Saw 2 and 3 Amanda even more of an interesting character. The scene where she breaks down, admitting she can't do it without John, and John fighting through tears to reassure that she can, that he trusts her to carry on his legacy. Amanda was, and always will be, John's greatest accomplice. Logan, Lawrence, and Hoffman can fight over second place. A movie can go so wrong in trying to humanize the villain that it kills any momentum that it gains throughout. Luckily, Saw X gets it right, giving the first half hour to John's roller coaster ride of emotions, from epic high to desolate low. We can add what we learned in this movie to the timeline of the franchise, piecing together John's motives behind the Jigsaw persona. This also lends to being one of the most rewatchable, and more importantly, most accessible Saw sequels. You really only need to have seen the first movie, which is good because that's obviously the most popular one, so people can jump right back into this one after nearly 2 decades. This film did very well, and Saw 11 was announced for our 2024 release, so bonus points for being the catalyst for even more Saw content for hopefully years to come. Saw X is the most beautifully shot in the franchise, a modern rendition of some of the series' most iconic traits. Kevin Greutert returned to direct, who I believe to be the best director of the series, and he injects so much style and life to the film. The setting of Mexico also adds another intriguing layer to the story, as this is the first time that an actual location is mentioned, and the warm yellow filter of Saw Past works perfectly for stereotypical Mexico in American cinema, with the green hues showing back up in the factory scenes. Saw X is a true paragon for a prequel in a once-forgotten horror franchise. For Tobin Bell and Shawnee Smith to seamlessly step back into their roles like they never left. For Kevin Greutert to pick right back up where he left off, a more seasoned and mature filmmaker now, and create this glorious film is nothing short of a miracle, and rightfully deserves its place this high on the list.
What the fuck is an Obi?
Okay, I'll admit it. I was never as big a fan of Saw 2 as most people seem to be, until I analyzed it for the long-form video breakdown. Don't get me wrong, I've always loved it. It's definitely the second most rewatched in the series for me, but I never felt as strongly connected to it as others. But the subtle themes, the character studies, the whirlwind of emotions throughout, beautifully crafted around a macabre series of traps. I've seen the light. I'm a believer now. But what makes Saw 2 work so well? Well, it takes everything about the original and improves upon it, making it bigger and better. Where in the first, we only hear Jigsaw for the entire movie until the final minutes, John Kramer is front and center here, in all his goth-cloaked glory. He's quickly found by Detective Eric Matthews and his team, with much of the police aspect of this movie taking place in his headquarters, and the interrogation scenes in this one are some of the most interesting in the series. we get to finally learn about the deranged killer, and what makes him tick. Much of it is driven by Eric Matthews' desperate attempts to find his son, and when he finds out Daniel's a part of Jigsaw's latest game, ensure his safe return. In the game, Daniel joins a group of others in a Big Brother house from hell, as surveillance cameras allow John to watch each trap play out. Amanda also wakes up in the house, but she's revealed to be a mole, making sure the game goes smoothly and the other players follow the rules. She's still very much in danger, as Xavier tosses her into the iconic needle pit. When she and Daniel are cornered in the bathroom from the first Saw, Daniel springs back to life, eventually killing Xavier and preserving himself and Amanda. It's only after Eric Matthews runs out of patience that John takes him to the house, where he finds the game to have concluded some time ago. If only Detective Matthews would have heeded John's words, he would have found Daniel in a safe place. The game we watched Daniel and Amanda endure happened hours beforehand, and when the cops find the recording, it hits the viewer like a rock. If you weren't already convinced that John is a criminal mastermind, a handful of steps ahead of anyone else, this cements it. He understands the human mind, accounts for his subjects. Along with that, each of the traps are so thematically rich, making up for their victims missing some character development. The standouts are actually relatively bloodless. Abby's incineration, with the devil drawn on the inside, calling back to Jigsaw's hint that when you're in hell, only the devil can help you. That right there is so brilliant, so simple, but it's absolutely stunning. And the needle pit, wow. Xavier, the drug dealer, tossing Amanda, a recovering addict, into the pit of used needles that she tried so hard to distance herself from. It's heartbreaking. I did a psychoanalytic breakdown of each of the characters in the long-form video, and I'm not going to parrot everything from that here, but Xavier's character is one of the most interesting in the franchise to me. I feel like I can see guilt come through in some scenes, heavily masked by his toxic masculine brute exterior. He's one of the most downright deplorable victims in the franchise, and met his justified end. But to write him off without taking his human side into account is doing a disservice to a well-played subtle role. The humanization of Amanda and John works well to create deeper characters than most horror franchises bother to do with their villains, or protagonists, depending on how you look at them. Saw 2 is where they shifted into a deeper narrative with the Jigsaw killings, which carried on throughout the remaining sequels, to both their credit and their fault. Saw 2 is one of my all-time favorite movies now, simply because of everything I learned from analyzing it so heavily, which further grows my emotional connection to it. It's one of the movies I grew up on. I've watched it countless times, but appreciating its craft, a beautifully intertwined game with Jigsaw in the limelight, the themes behind each decision, show that this is a product of love, in a franchise so full of hate.
I'm having a blast. This is the most fun I've had without lubricant.
Something about not putting the original at number 1 almost feels like heresy. For so long I held the belief that no sequel in any franchise was better than the original. I think if I add nostalgic bias to the equation, it probably would still come out on top. Saw was one of the first horror movies I ever watched as a kid, and I couldn't tell you how many times I've rewatched it in the nearly 20 years since its release. As weird as it may be, it's a comfort movie for me. It's much less gory than many remember. Acting out is more of a psychological thriller than anything else. There's little bits of information scattered throughout that you can really only connect after the grand reveal, when John Kramer, the thought-to-be dead man in the middle, rises up from his pool of blood. It's one of the greatest, most jaw-dropping twists in any movie, and I'd be willing to put it up against any other. The information isn't spoon-fed to the audience. Keen eyes and attentive minds are needed for this, and full praise should be given to James Wan and Leigh Whannell for crafting such a perfect introductory plot. Wan and Whannell turned what could have been another low-budget, gore-ridden schlock of a movie into a passionate, unapologetically grungy, yet beautiful film. The production design levels up the look of the movie, reflecting the sorrowful post-9/11 America of the time. Dr. Lawrence Gordon and Adam Stanheight's game is perfectly simplistic. Lock them up in a shitty, derelict bathroom, and slowly turn themselves on one another, while they try and find a way out. Gordon takes the biggest gamble, when he saws his own foot off in order to try and save his family, having heard their peril over the phone at the hands of Zepp, the hospital orderly we expected to be Jigsaw the whole time. Even Detective Tapp believes it to be Zepp, having lost his place on the police force as a result of his incessant need to bring down Jigsaw, and vindicate his conscience of his partner's untimely death. Danny Glover is heavily underutilized in this role, but every moment he is on screen is another positive for the film. But of course, the film would be nothing without the hilariously over-the-top performances from Cary Elwes and Leigh Whannell. As their confusion wanes and their desperation grows, we get glimpses of their natures reflected in the amazing direction at the hands of James Wan. When Lawrence speaks, the camera is static, reflecting his calm demeanor. When Adam speaks, the camera is shaky, dynamic in movement, as he is unable to hide how scared he is. It's a facet of the film so easy to miss, especially upon the first couple watches, as the story engrosses you in its world. leaving you with moral dilemmas much like the players themselves must answer. The end of Saw is inherently bleak, ending with Adam realizing the man he considered dead to be the orchestrator of the games he's had to endure, only to be locked in the dark, with no real path of escape. All he can do is scream, and it cuts to black. It's not a happy ending. We'd be fools to expect one after watching this for 100 minutes. But from the moment he wakes up, to his final moments before it, I am cheering him on. I want him to escape. I feel so connected to both him and Gordon that I want them to live. Neither of them are really likable as people. They're both kind of annoying. I don't find myself finding many comparisons to them. But something about being thrown in with them, feeling like I'm chained in that grotesque bathroom with them, is so cathartic. It's almost an unexplainable trait with this film, but a credit to Leigh Whannell for creating such perfectly flawed characters, and giving us time to learn about them, and learn to appreciate who they are. Saw is the perfect movie. I will always have it among my favorite films of all time, and being the gateway into my love and obsession for the horror genre will always hold a special place in my heart. But there's just one more film that surpasses it, for being the best Saw movie in my eyes.
Piranha.
John.
Saw 6 is everything a Saw movie should be and more. It has something for everyone that's withstood 5 movies of varying enjoyability, and is the perfect payoff for the series, which was at one point to be considered the final chapter in this convoluted tale. When Saw 4 introduced Hoffman as the new Jigsaw, I was a bit hesitant to accept it, but excited to see where it would go. Then, in 5, he's mostly relegated to being on the run, with Strahm hot on his trail. It's not until Saw 6 that we finally see his test, to see if he's truly worthy of carrying on John's legacy. And boy, he puts up one hell of a show. Perez is back and 100%, not accepting the notion that Strahm was the hidden accomplice to Jigsaw, her eyes honed in on Hoffman. When they're in the audio lab, and the Jigsaw tape continuously repeats,
Right now you're feeling helpless.
it reflects what Hoffman is thinking at the time, as he fidgets around the room. Once the audio tech cracks the modulated voice, revealing Hoffman's behind it, he goes absolutely wild, slaying everyone in the room. Just when he thinks he's clear, Jill gets him with the classic electric chair gambit, and puts the reverse bear trap on him. But he manages against all odds to escape, even without the key. He may be completely twisting John's logic behind the Jigsaw way, rewriting the purpose behind every method, but he is gonna fight till the bitter end. He is unapologetically evil, and a perfect slasher that captures the essence of the evolution of the Saw franchise. What started as this beautiful psychological thriller, soon morphed into sequel upon sequel, year after year of a continuous shift towards pure bloodshed. Like the Jigsaw legacy has lost much of the nuance from the first few, Hoffman has mutated the legacy into his own. Where Saw 6 gets it right is the purpose behind that bloodshed. Hoffman is in self-preservation mode, and our game is one of the best yet. It follows William Easton, a healthcare exec being forced to apply his formula to real people. On paper, rejecting 2/3 of applications can seem easy, being played off as the company policy, but when faced with making those decisions himself, it visibly becomes much harder for him. He immediately shows willingness to disregard his formula, saving his potentially unhealthy secretary with a family, in lieu of a perfectly healthy man with no loved ones. But the nonpareil trap has to be the shotgun carousel, literally killing off 2/3 of his most prized workers, like his policy does every day. It's a harrowing commentary on the relationship between healthcare and business in America, coming at a time where this was a hot topic of discussion with the introduction of Obamacare. Watching William come to terms with the fact that his method failed, like John did in Saw 3, is both gratifying and heartbreaking. At his core, I do think he's a good person, but lost his way as so many do in positions of power. Saw 6 is the magnum opus of the Saw franchise thus far. A perfectly paced, well-written, thematically rich film. More than worthy of top spot on the list. And I'd love to know what everyone else's ranking is. As always, I'll be in the comments to discuss further. In the meantime, I'm not sure what else is coming that's Saw related, but I appreciate the support that the Saw videos have gotten thus far. It means so much that people are willing to listen to me gush about my favorite franchise. As always, thank you for watching.